tell me when you start. All right. My name is Peter Young. I'm the Yale class of 1974. Can you take?
Hello.
1974, Branford College. We're dealing with one technical issue, which hopefully we'll solve because with the Yale technicians. So right now, the people here in New York can hear us, obviously, and the people on the streaming video and on the dial-in number can hear us. So we'll get started, and then hopefully they'll be able to get the connection to the Yale students who are up at William Harkness Hall.
What was your code?
So I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 10th, it's now the 10th in a series of panel webinars on careers after Yale. And this series really focuses on providing students and alumni, actually, we have a balance of the two, with candid, helpful views of different professions via panels of successful practitioners in each field. Today's profession is the education profession, and the overall concept is really to target professions that Yaleys pursue, and also in particular where there are myths and misconceptions about what is happening, what is best suited, who is best suited for the profession, and what it's like when you get there. I think all of you realize that the information that's available gets distorted. So if you watch TV, you get a distorted view about being a lawyer or being a doctor and so forth. So you have to balance it with hearing people who can give you a candid view. Of over 1,300 students and alumni have attended the first 9 of these career panels. And prior to this year, we had the legal profession twice, investment banking twice, medical, entrepreneurism, drama and film, and consulting. And this academic year, we're featuring the medical profession, which we had on October 29th, education, which is this evening, government and nonprofits, and also investing, which will include private equity, venture capital, and fund management. So these are all very important professions, but also ones where a lot of Yale's graduates go into. Now this event is somewhat unique in that from a logistical point of view, we have 3 simultaneous venues. We have the meeting room here in New York. We have room 116 at William Harkness Hall at Yale. And we have a large number of people participating by streaming video and an audio conference call. And the reason for this is very important because we're trying to capture the best combination of where the panelists are willing to be, where the students are, and where the alumni are. So today we have all of our panelists here in New York, and Yale is connected by video conference. We have varied quite a bit, though. There are times where all the panelists have been up in New Haven. There are times where we've had 2 in New Haven and 2 here. And then obviously today's combination with all the panelists here in New York. For this particular session, we have 167 who've registered across 3 venues, about 20 here in New York, 45 at Yale, and 100 via the streaming video and audio. In New Haven, we have Robin Akampora, an Associate Director of the Yale Undergraduate Career Services, who, if she can hear me, is the one who's going to coordinate questions that are being asked by the Yale students. So, before I introduce the speakers, however, I would like to thank a number of people and organizations. This is a collaborative effort on the part of a number of people and organizations. First, I'd like to thank Elaine Mazzarella and Robin Campora of the Yale Undergraduate Career Services, Steve Bloom, Barbara Burt, and Elizabeth Rocher of the AYA, the Student and Alumni of Yale organization called STAY, Savina Dahl of the Asian American Cultural Center, Trish Takemoto from the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, who is here, Mai Lu of the Yale Alumni Association of New York, and Rachel Tobin of the Junior Class Council, and others. And all basically have contributed towards planning and organizing this event. And I also want to thank Tom Melvin of my firm, Younger Partners, who's worked very hard on this event and is manning the streaming video portion of this event. I also want to give special thanks to Paul Weiss, who has graciously provided the use of their meeting room and their video conferencing equipment. Paul Weiss, as many of you know, is a large law firm, international law firm, with more than 700 lawyers whose long-standing clients include many of the largest publicly and privately held companies in the United States and throughout the world. And in fact, Les Fagan, who is a partner here at Paul Weiss, is a Yale graduate, and he's been gracious in providing us with these facilities, but also we twisted his arm and he was a panelist for the legal panel and did an excellent job. But before we start, I really want to step back and say why have this kind of event? Because obviously Yale students, or at least so I understand, are smart and resourceful, and as well as the graduates. But the real issue here is how do you get candid and credible information about professions? And whereas we can't help you figure yourself out, because of course there's the other side of the equation, which is being honest about yourself in terms of what you're good at, what you like and don't like. But what we can do is, through this series, is to help you get candid views so that you can make some intelligent choices about your careers. Now, the interesting thing is many of the professions that we feature thus far are heavily glamorized on TV and film. Law, medical, entrepreneurism, and there's some that have been demonized, like my career, my profession, investment bank, that used to be glamorized and now it's demonized. So it can go the other way. But basically, education, although it's, no one really glamorizes it more than it really is, it's facing a number of major changes, whether it's funding, technology, or structural, that are both good and bad. So it's very interesting because this weekend I was reading the weekend Wall Street Journal, and there was a front page article about that talked about the 10% decline in student enrollments in private colleges in 2012. And they commented that it was a reflection of tuitions that have gone up at triple the inflation rate, a soft job market for graduating students, and a declining number of graduating high school students. But also about the impact of online instruction. We've all heard about these mass online courses, the funding cuts by state and federal government, and the resulting financial crisis facing many of the colleges below the top 500 or so. But these are issues not only faced by colleges, but they're faced by K through 12 and so forth. These are not things that are just specific to college or graduate school. And on the other hand, there's some very positive things happening, such as Teach America and other changes. So it's my hope that these issues will be touched on by the panelists. By the way, there's one other reason why we decided to include education as a career, and that is the increase in interest in education by Yale graduates. In fact, a regular survey conducted by Yale actually indicated that teaching was the destination of 18% of Yale graduates in 2010, up from 13% in 2004. Something I didn't know, but it's really remarkable. So this is not only a field where there are challenges, pluses and minuses, but it's also one of great interest among Yale students and graduates. So for today's event, I'll first introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to guide them through the 5 topics or questions that you saw on the invitation that you responded to, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Those of you who are participating by the conference call should send your questions via email to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. Since it's broadcast only, you can't speak unless you send an email.
Okay.
And we'll be monitoring your emails, and we'll pass your questions on to the panelists. You are here at Paul Weiss in New York, you just raise your hands. And those of you who are at Yale at William Hartis Hall, once we have the connection, you should also raise your hands, and Robin will choose people to ask questions. We do expect to end at 5:30, but the panelists have graciously agreed to stay on to answer questions and meet with the attendees here in New York. So let me just introduce the people that in the order in which they're seated here and also listed in the invitation. We have Michaela Daniel, who's a Senior Education Immigration Policy Advisor for the New York City Council Speaker Christina Quinn, and a graduate of the Yale School of Management. We have George Davison, who is the head of Grace Church School, a well-known school here in New York, and was a graduate of Yale College, 1979. We have Joanna Dolgen, who is at the College Preparatory English course designer and teacher in the New York public school system, and a graduate from Yale College, 2003. And we have Leslie Walzer, who is chair of the Performing Arts Department at the Coven of the Sacred Heart in Manhattan, who also graduated from Yale. So here we have 3 Yale graduates, which by the way is not a requirement to be a panelist. We've had some panelists who are not Yale graduates, but it's nice to have people who have the experience. And the most noticeable thing is we have a very, very diverse panel. I mean, remarkably diverse. And in fact, they don't cover all the different aspects of education by any means, but they certainly cover quite a few. So with that, why don't we start? And I raised some of the questions that came out of the Wall Street Journal article and so forth, plus and minus. Maybe I'll first ask the panelists if they can talk about where they think the profession is heading, both good and bad. And I'll let the panelists decide what order they want to address the question.
Okay. I try to be good, you know. When the boy says, I want to go first, you get in trouble, at least in my business anyway. So I just want to make sure, as if I'm answering first, that everybody understands that we do have people from a range of different places in the profession. And I'm going to come at this from the point of view of independent schools, which are a slightly different animal and a different career path, and also from the point of view of a career as an administrator in independent schools. You know, as we were talking, you know, you hear about University of Phoenix, and there has been a lot of talk about that same kind of disruption hitting the independent school industry. Personally, I think that's very unlikely because in the independent schools, the change in online learning is going to be accompanied with a lot of personal support in the context of the schools. And in fact, in education in general, this is the great high-tech high example. You also have the Stanford High, which are both schools where they employ a lot of online learning, but they haven't reduced the total number of students available. Teachers available to the students. That you still have, there are going to be a lot of jobs in schools. In fact, there are more jobs, I think, for people like the audience here than there are for people like me, because the sage on the stage model of how you deliver education is gone. And so what the students will need in the next generation is people who are adept at using the technology and are good mentors and are good coaches. But the student-teacher ratio at independent schools is not going to change. And the basic reason for that is that parents are throwing down a big ticket. They want the human interaction. People who are buying a high-end good, which independent schools are, and even our families on financial aid are putting down a huge portion of their annual income for it, want the personal touch that you come in with a high-end good. And so that's not going to change. You know, and as for the management end, there's going to be a huge demand for new management leaders in the independent industry. I was just at a school heads conference from New York State, and I'm still one of the youngest people in the room, which means that there's going to be a huge outflow of administrators from independent schools coming out. So it's a very fertile area for people to come in.
By the way, I now can see the students at Yale, so we welcome you. We're sorry for the technical glitch, but we want to say hello, all right?
So I guess I would like to echo a lot of what George said, even though I come at this from probably a very different side of the spectrum. I teach at a Title I public high school. It's a grade 6 through 12 in the same neighborhood as George's school. It is not a high ticket item to attend my school. Title I means that over 75% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, which is sort of the demarcation of high poverty population. But I think the skills that George is discussing is very similar to what happens in my school and in my life. It's really about how do you provide individual attention, how do you get students excited to learn. It is certainly not about me talking. That is not how I think students learn, especially students who don't necessarily want to succeed or be there or see why they need to hear what I have to say. So I very much think it's a similar skill set. The mentoring I feel is crucial. At our school, it's really all about making students feel safe and respected and that their voices matter. So the learning has better matter so that your voice, you want to raise your voice to participate. But it's really a wonderful field with, the challenges I think have probably always been there. I think they continue as the pressures of poverty don't change. If anything, they increase. And as the profession faces pressure from standardized tests and some vilification in the media, along with you, Peter, and the bankers, I think teachers sometimes are seen as the enemy to quality education. I'm not always trusted to assess my students, to know what they know. So that is a pressure, but one that I think at my school we delight in fighting against and showing a different model.
Leslie?
As far as where is the profession heading, I would say that more and more of the education field is looking for young people who have advanced degrees in particular subjects. They know their subject really well, especially in math and science. They're in very high demand. AP courses, high school science, math courses. The profession demands that you be very versatile, and technology keeps changing. I know you all grew up with that, and it's the change is very familiar to you, but it keeps changing very, very fast. And I think particularly interesting things is, as I was talking to Peter the other day, this reverse classroom where you give out the assignments or they listen to a lecture at home or an assignment on how to do a particular math problem, and then they come in and they interact with the teachers in the classroom. I think that's something that's going to be changing in the future, and that kind of instructional model where they're mentoring the students in the class, not, as you said, delivering lectures.
Yeah, actually Leslie and I chatted the other day in the morning, and then later in the day I went to see Peter Salovey's speech here in New York, and the first thing he said was exactly what you said. He said, I've been teaching for 25 years, and the way I taught 25 years ago, sitting behind the lectern and giving a speech, and now it's more the opportunity to have people watch things online and then spend the classroom time interacting with the professor. So he was very enthusiastic about technology helping to change the way you teach. Kelly?
Yeah, so at this point in my career, I'm not in a school or in a classroom, and so a little bit of a broader sort of bird's eye view of the field of education as being not only policy, foundations are having a really huge impact on sort of education and the conversation about education. I think that that's something that has changed in the last decade too, that Gates, that Robin Hood, that the Walton Foundation are sort of a huge player in the dialogue about education and where we are going in education. Joanna brought up standardized test scores, and I think that is something that has also changed over the decade that I've been working in education too, from something that you sort of cared about. When I got hired as a new teacher, the head of the school didn't want me to be in an important testing grade, one of the ones that they looked at. Now every grade is an important testing grade, and we are, I think, trying to pull more meaning out of test scores than is really possible. I think that there's a lot to be said about accountability, but I think so much of education is human, that there's some wiggle room there that you can pretend numbers are real and they are the truth and everything, and that's not always the case. I think that technology is something very interesting, and ed tech as a space and as an industry is something that is certainly growing, and something I know that is sort of interesting and attractive. I think overall, I think there are lots of entry points now into the field of education that you don't have to start with teaching. You don't have to go straight in or through a classroom. But I do think that I don't want to say that it's dangerous, but I do think that there is a ton to be said about knowing what actually happens in the classroom before you try and shape it from the outside, because it is a very particular world, the classroom, and I don't necessarily know how much the dynamics of that are going to change. I mean, students are going to have needs no matter whether they are from poverty or just from being children and having hormones. And the dynamic of what it's like to teach and the energy that it takes to teach every day and to get up and perform 5 periods a day and to not have control of your time and to be there for people is a very real thing. And I think trying to shape education without really knowing what that's like is challenging at best.
Let me ask each one of you, say, pick one myth that you can think of that's meaningful, where when you talk to people, they clearly think of something that you're involved with as in education as being quite different from what it really is. So
I think I could answer that right off the bat. The hours, they think the hours are great, and you have the summer off, and the hours are long and rewarding, and get up at 5 o'clock, don't get home till 7:30, 8, sometimes 10. I'm performing arts chair, so lots of times it's 10 o'clock at night. So the hours are very long, and you're grading papers. It takes a lot of time, and the summer is really, time for professional development. So I think that's one myth for me.
Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking a little bit about some of those movies where the teacher is the hero and swoops in and saves the day, and I'm torn whether that's a myth or reality. And I think that I think it's definitely much more than one teacher in a classroom. I think it's about a whole school community creating an environment for young people. But I think that it is a reality that teachers do have a very profound impact, and that you can really inspire kids and you can make them feel safe and you can listen to them. And I don't think it's not going to solve all their problems, especially if they're then going to classrooms where they're not being listened to or not feeling respected. But I do think it makes a real difference. So that, I think, it's not the Superman, but it is powerful.
Any myth you can think?
All right, I'll throw in, as someone who signs contracts, we pay pretty well. There was a myth that schools didn't pay well. They do pay well now. And in this city, thanks to Mayor Bloomberg, who ran the salaries up, and everybody else went up with them. We work hard and we're well paid. We are paid much more than other people in not-for-profit. Because in independent schools we have a defined contribution pension plan, your pension's secure too if you're not in the independent school world. And honestly, independent school administrators, like college administrators, are well paid too. But we work all summer.
Whether this is the profession or just the field in general, this idea that urban public schools are scary, awful places that are, in the depths of despair, and that you have to escape to some other space, be it a specialized high school or charter school, or it's just not true. New York City has 1,700 schools, public schools, many of which are really incredible places. So that's a myth I would like to dispel.
By the way, both my parents are professors, and my wife is a professor. And so I certainly understand what you're talking about in terms of work environment.
Yes.
They do work. But my father also used to say, he said, because I work in business, he said, you haven't seen politics until you've seen politics in an academic event. So
we pay better than the universities in schools.
Mhm.
But we don't give tenure in independent schools, so we don't have the same politics.
Oh, I see, okay, great. You know, I suddenly realized that although this is a fairly diverse panel, there's one part we are missing, which is people who pursue education to do research and so forth. And maybe this is an unfair question, but maybe because everyone here is really more in the teaching side. Any comments on that part? And if you don't want to, that's all right, in terms of just, you know, how that's evolving, right? If any comments?
I really can't speak to
No?
that, I'm sorry.
All right. Well, let's go on to the next one, which is, you know, the one thing that's coming out in all of these career panels is that there's really no profession that is right or wrong. It's really a question of what's the fit with you, right? And so and some professions there are certain characteristics that are key to whether you're going to be successful or not, or happy. So I go to the next question, which is, in your view, having seen personally, being in the profession, but also seeing many people go in and leave, what are the characteristics that you see of skills, but also temperament, that are successful ones for being in education? Leslie?
I wrote those down, actually, because so many I thought of. First of all, I think it's, if I speak for other people on the panel, but it's physically demanding. You have to have a lot of patience. You have to be able to improvise. Even-tempered is very important. And have a strong commitment to educating children. I mean, it's almost like a vocation. You have to be versatile in your own subject. And I think that collaborating with colleagues, especially in my department, we have to work together, we collaborate. It's hard because you're sort of the king or queen of your classroom, but then you also collaborate with your other colleagues on projects, or we have performances or school projects, all kinds of things. So you have to be collaborative as well as being master of your own classroom.
Joanne?
Yeah, I think you have to love young people. I think you have to believe in them. I think what I like about teaching and some of the skills that I think are useful is, I loved school and I was good at it, and I love thinking about books and talking about ideas, and so it's how do I help other people access that, and maybe kids who don't love English and didn't have as positive experiences with school. So sort of thinking about what is it that kids really need to know, and how do we get them there in a way that's relevant and enjoyable for students. So to do that, I require collaborating with colleagues who are also equally committed. And I think just staying really positive and focused and believing that there is real purpose. I think the word vocation makes sense. And
So you're saying
is apt.
that to be successful, you have to have a certain view about education and its importance.
I think you have to view that it's important, and I think you have to believe that all kids can learn. But I don't think there's one view. I think you will be a better teacher if you have a community to collaborate with, either on specific kids and their needs, or on just your content and your subject area and sort of what you're trying to do to bounce ideas off each other. I think that helps. I don't think it's a prerequisite.
Characteristics of
I did say we get paid in the earlier comment, but I think that people really don't go into it for the money. You have to love all aspects of it, and you have to be a people person, because that's what it is. It's about colleagues, it's about children, it's about parents, it's about broader communities, and you have to feel comfortable across those broader communities. You have to be a high energy person. It requires a lot of energy. By the end of the day, you are drained, and the younger the kids that you're working with, the more energy you need. Kindergarten teachers are exhausted at the end of the day because they have been so completely focused on the lives of their children, and There are all sorts of studies about, there's the famous Perry study about 2 years in preschool and how that makes a big difference 25 years later versus kids that didn't have that. You have to be a good morning person because it's a morning job. You can't start slowly, otherwise you're toast. You get so much done. Once when I was at the beginning of my career, I had a summer job working for an event planning operation, which people think event planning is pretty high energy. I was always amazed at how little they did in a given day compared to what we were doing in the school day. You have to get to those moments where, like an actor, where you really do a beautiful job and you take the great pleasure and satisfaction from doing that. That you have to say, okay, because the kid isn't going to say, that was a great job you did teaching today. You have to know when they've learned, and when you get that sense of flow, it's really great. But you have to be able to be intrinsically motivated and understand those satisfaction rewards as they come.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so much that I agree with that about what's been said. Being a people person is clearly, and which doesn't mean you have to be outgoing but you have to be curious about people and what motivates people, and I say that both from the perspective of being a teacher and trying to motivate students to learn, but also education is a very emotionally charged field, both sort of in a school level and then all the way up. Education is something that everyone feels very personally attached to because we've all gotten an education and we all think we know about education enough to be sort of an expert on it. So people have very strong feelings and opinions across the board about the field, and so being able to sort of balance all of those and work with people, I think is an important piece. And I think creativity and resourcefulness is also something I want to throw in. It's amazing. Education funding has gone up, and yet still, there just is never enough money to do everything that you want to be able to do. And so figuring out how to make it happen, out of paper clips and a piece of paper is a fun challenge that I always enjoyed. But I think that's just sort of across the board, at least in the public school space.
I think all of you, because you've been involved long enough, you've probably seen people who haven't succeeded. But it's probably not always a skill issue. Maybe it's just a personality fit or whatever. So tell me, we'll go back in reverse order, which is just from experience. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people who just didn't work, right? It didn't work out, even if they wanted to be it, right? What are the things to look for, or what advice among the students here as far as what kinds of things you think are signs that maybe there isn't a fit?
Well, so number one, I want to say education is a particularly tricky space in terms of longevity in the field, because I think with Teach for America, with a lot of programs that are sort of popular right now, there's this idea that you will go into education very briefly and then leave for something else. And I sort of wonder how many people aren't even considering education as a long-term career, that whether it's not prestigious enough, or there's not the money to do it, or it won't actually be challenging. I don't know. So I would just like to encourage everyone that there are full careers to be made in the education space, both in the classroom and beyond. And even if you are considering entering the field through an alternative measure, don't totally close your mind off to staying long term. I think that kind of closed mind thinking is certainly something that leads to a lack of longevity, if not success. And I think people who are teaching is the hardest thing that I have ever done in my entire life, and I've worked on campaigns, and I've run a school, and I've done other things that should be hard, and it's the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And if you are not willing to give your all to it, at least at the beginning, I think that's not necessarily going to lead to success.
But you know, one thing in reacting to what you say though, I'm a little troubled by it because what you said could apply to a lot of professions. You know, oh, you have to think of a career in the long term. It's hard and you have to, so, but I'm not hearing things that are distinctive about education as a profession, because I think you could apply that to many, many professions saying.
Certainly, and I'm clearly not necessarily articulating myself that well for a group that is not necessarily already in this field. And I think education is a particular field. Like in this moment right now, education is unique in that people, I mean, nobody goes to law school saying like, maybe I'll try out the law, right? Like you can't really, I mean, I suppose there's paralegaling to try it out, but I don't think there are a lot of other careers that somebody's like, I'm going to go be a doctor for 2 years and then go do my real profession. So, but I do think that there are entry points now that have been changes to certification, subsidized grad schools that allow people to try out education and not have it maybe be their thing.
But is that a high percent? In other words, you know, I understand if it's Yale, like a lot of schools, there's Teacher America, which and so forth has a temporary characteristic to it potentially. But if you look at teachers general, is that true? Are there a high percentage of them really just going in temporarily?
Let me jump in here. So I think just to answer that question about what is unique, you have to see yourself as a nurturer. If you're in education, that you are an empathetic person whose job it is to nurture a group of people forward. I don't think lawyers necessarily see themselves as nurturers. I don't think accountants necessarily see themselves as nurturers. So I think that if you don't see yourself as someone who can nurture people, and that can be your colleagues, that has to be your students, in the context of a group, you're not going to be successful in schools. And the people who haven't been successful in schools that I've seen has been because they want things to go in the context of the class according to the schedule that they are laying out for the class. That they are trying to define success in the context of their own benchmarks, rather than understanding as an empathetic person what the benchmarks are for the kids in front of them in the class. And they get to be the people who are trying to push a string, and they end up exhausting themselves, and they finally burn right out of the profession. I don't have to fire that many of those. They usually go on their own.
They figure it out.
They figure it out. You know, when they're starting to post on their Facebook page that it's Sunday and ugh, I have to go back, I get an indication that they don't want to come back. But they're actually saying things, and these are true stories from real life. They're saying that they don't understand. I think the other piece that we saw that affects us is that still, especially for Yaleys, it's seen as a low status position. I lost a great Yale graduate teacher who couldn't see himself going back to his 5th reunion and saying he was teaching 7th grade. So instead he got a fellowship and teaches in higher ed now. And every time I see him, he says it was the biggest mistake he made in his life. But he was stuck with that status. How can I go back and say to my peers, I'm doing this low status, high satisfaction profession? And if you're worried about your status in terms of your Yale peers, you're not going to last.
I want to echo what George said about ego, and there's no one promoting you. There's no bonus if you do, well, in a few schools, like for the most part, there's no bonus
that
if you do,
reduces productivity.
if you do well. You know, it's not, and it very rarely, I think George mentioned this, does someone pat you on the back and say, good job, whether it be a student or somebody else. And it is a job, I think, that is often not considered professional or intellectual. And it is something that you have to wrestle with. And how are you finding satisfaction? How is that being measured? Can you measure it yourself? And I think that it is something I think we all wrestle with as, you know, intellectuals and ambitious people. And it is that satisfaction that happens sort of every day from this very unglamorous work. And we're at Paul Weiss in New York. It's this beautiful building, the artwork on the walls, like it feels like a museum here. And I bet if I worked here, they would give me delicious free coffee every day and send me home in a car service if it was late. And you know, sometimes I am very envious of that. You know, I don't have a clean bathroom. There's a mouse in my classroom. It's not, I get disrespected by 17-year-olds. You know, it's not that glamorous. But I also still like it, and I still think that I'm not going to be the richest person. I'm not going to wow people, I don't think, at my reunion. But I do think that what I'm doing is important, and that I'm part of a larger movement of people who believe that working in education is fighting for social justice, and that is very satisfying.
But if you think of those, say, I'm sure, because you've been teaching for a couple of years, and I'm sure some people left, right, the school.
Right.
What have typically been the reasons why they ended up leaving, as opposed, I'm not talking about going just to another school.
Right.
But
People
just
don't leave
decided to leave.
Joanna's school.
Right, so the part of it is people don't typically leave my school because it's a wonderful place to work with committed professionals. Yeah, I think sometimes people sour on kids and feel very overwhelmed by their problems and frustrated and helpless, and I think that can sometimes take a slightly nasty edge, and those people aren't gonna last. It can be very disheartening, and I think that can really get to somebody.
I was agreeing with George. I think that if they have a lack of empathy, if they can't imagine what it was like to be that age and in school, I think that's an important thing for a teacher, to empathize with the students and remember what it was like when you were that age. And I think that helps. Also, some teachers become too close to students almost. They can't get a perspective on them. They can't have sort of an arm's length. And so that sort of can do them in as well. I'm trying to think, the organizational skills. If you don't have organizational skills, that's a real, sometimes people leave because of that. They just can't hack it.
Yeah. Are there some differences in the answers to these questions based on what kind of school you're teaching at? Is it, with some of the questions that we've asked, would be different if you were at teaching a public school in the middle of a very bad part of New York City, or versus being at a charter school and so forth. Would you answer the question differently in terms of what's the right kind of person, to be teaching there versus, because obviously some places, schools, the biggest issue is just safety, right, for example, right? Or in some cases you have students who they don't want to be there and they're not motivated, and it's very, very challenging them to and yet other schools where the majority of the students actually want to learn, right? So it can be different. So how would it be different? How would you answer this question differently about what the profession is like for individuals and whether it's the right place for them, depending upon what kind of school?
So I think it's even less like a skills and the right type of person, and more knowing your values and what you care about. As people have said, this is a very sort of almost a vocation, a calling, right? You are rewarded mostly in knowing that the work you're doing has impact and meaning. And different schools, different organizations have very different approaches and sort of end goal, desire, results, and have different student populations, and knowing what drives you and why you want to be in education. I think if you don't feel it is a vocation, a calling, something that you are sort of meant to do, I don't think it should be in the field. And so figuring out then, no excuses, charter schools, teachers work, 60 hours a week, are very data driven, there is a very prescriptive way of how teachers are dealt with and how they sort of interact with students. Student discipline is different in a school like, an uncommon school versus the school that Joanna works in, where students call teachers by their first names, and it's about creating a safe space as opposed to creating sort of a method and a way of doing things that can be replicated over and over again. Fit is just incredibly important in terms of education and drive and work, and so knowing what drives you and finding a school, be it an independent school, a charter school, a public school, that matches that and matches what you want to do, I think is important in terms of longevity and success.
So you see some big differences. So in other words, there could be some Yale students where if they went to one type of school, they could be very happy, but if they went to another, they could be very unhappy.
Yes, very much
And how
so.
do they figure this out?
That's a really good question. Visiting schools is sort of a huge way. I can't underestimate the power and value of going and seeing a school in person and in action and talking to current teachers and talking to students. In the public school world, there is a website called InsideSchools.org, and it's run out of the new school, and they have narrative reviews of every school in the city, every public school, and then they have a parent comment section. So just a couple of quick and easy ways on the public school space, but really doing your research and getting a sense of what the school is all about, and especially if you are new to the profession, if you are starting out, if there are not people, whether it's the principal and assistant principal, teachers in the school who will engage with you, that is a bad sign, because you are going to need a supportive community and people who are willing and ready to engage with you and work with you from the very start.
George?
Well, you know, I agree with absolutely everything there. And in the context of independent schools, we're going to vet the living daylights out of you. So you're going to spend a lot of time with us, which you don't necessarily get in the public school system. Nobody gets to work with us who hasn't spent a full day interacting with about 20 people. So you'll get a sense of the ethos and nature of the community. You know, I have a very close friend from Yale who went to Yale Law School. And after practicing law at a New Haven law firm, decided he'd had enough of trying out to be a lawyer, and he became a teacher in the public schools in New Haven. He remains a teacher in the public schools in New Haven, but the first school he went to wasn't a good fit. And it wasn't a good fit not for the kids, but for the colleague group in that school, which had a certain number. And New Haven obviously is somewhat different. There are people with chips on their shoulders about Yale in New Haven. But then he switched to another public school. I don't think that the demographics of the kids is any difference, but it was the colleague group that changed. And he's been there for the last 20 years and is a beloved English teacher at a New Haven public school. Gets up every morning and loves going to school.
Well, I've got all these questions coming in via email and so forth. Robin, are you there? Can you hear me? Well, there we are. Okay. Robin, I'm going to ask you to start by asking if someone there up at William Harkness Hall has a question.
Sure, no problem. Does anybody have a question? We do have one question here.
Okay. And you can either ask a question for all the panelists or a specific panelist.
So this is specifically about independent schools. I am a senior and I'm hoping to get a job for next year at an independent school, and I was wondering what the best way
George is
to
hiring.
go about. Yeah.
We're expanding. We're hiring 13 new teachers next year.
So I guess, like, when do I apply for these jobs and how do I apply for
Okay,
these?
so number one, it depends on where you want to be. But there is a local association website that will have job postings. So in 3 weeks, right at Thanksgiving, we are going to post a dozen jobs on our website that's going to be picked up on the New York State Association of Independent Schools job board. And so you have these school job boards and association job boards that lead you to the job boards. And I'm sure that if you're looking to move to Boston, there's the same thing. So what you do is you take a look at all of the schools in the area where you want to be. If you're in New York City, if you go to nysais.org, that leads you into all the schools. And every school has a job site on their website. So that's fairly easy. And I would say if you want to move to Atlanta, the same thing's going to be true. If you want to move to San Francisco, the same thing's going to be true.
Also,
Great, thank you.
for independent schools, there are placement agencies in New York you know.
Yeah, that.
That when I'm hiring somebody for my department, it's very specialized. Oftentimes I get so many emails from people just coming in from the outside, and sometimes I look to those services. You know, some work for the whole country, some just work in Manhattan. So those are also a good resource. Also, you know, it's try to stand out from all the emails that department heads and heads of school get in the personnel office.
Right. So if you're looking for a job that's hard to hire, then or specialized in the arts, then going to the agencies. The biggest agency is called Carney Sando. There are also some, again, local ones. We are reticent to pay $10,000 for a new hire if we can get them for free, same person. So if you're an English major, if you're not teaching math or science, you don't start with the big search firms. You start by going directly to. The question was brought up about what about credentialing for people who are straight out of college. Independent schools do not require education degrees, and they do not, as a whole, require graduate degrees. But you will often find that they prefer some experience and some level of graduate degree, depending on where you are. And that's sort of the catch-22 for people coming straight out of college. But if you have relevant experience in education from your summers and from your life, that's a way in the door. There are also different schools that have intern programs and they have assistant programs, and those will all be on their websites.
Now I have a question here. We got a number of questions here from over the internet. And I like reading this one from Rachel because she sent the question 8 hours ago. So she was very anxious to have this question answered. So the question is, what's it really like to teach in a charter school? The recent New York Times piece about high turnover in many charter schools did not make them sound like an attractive work environment. Is this sensationalism? Or are most charter schools really like they are described in the article?
So I was director of operations at a charter school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and I want to just answer that question starting off by saying that there is no one charter school model. Charter schools are very, very, very different. And so don't be scared off by all charter schools necessarily, but do your research. I think that all of the schools are working to make this a more manageable long-term career for teachers. But I find that generally the schools run by big charter management organizations, so KIPP, Success Academy, Harlem Village Academy, Achievement First, which is both here and up there in New Haven, do have high turnover rates, do expect a lot of teachers, not that everywhere doesn't, but do your research and go visit schools and talk to teachers and look at their turnover rates and their retention rates before you take a job. It's not
So
totally.
you're saying, so there's a lot of variety, in other words, among the charter schools, so
Yes.
it just puts a greater burden
Yeah,
on
there's a
you.
lot of variety. It's not, I wouldn't say that the New York Times reporting on it is overly sensationalized, but I don't think it's universally true at every charter school.
Any other comments about that? Okay. Let's see if there's any question here in New York. Anyone here in New York have a question? Okay, go ahead. Speak up so that we can hear.
First, I really appreciate the talk. I think it's very informative. I had a question about what kind of a career approach might consider the purpose of education, what kind of curricula are appropriate. One thing that kind of comes from my career background is the level of financial literacy in this country seems relatively low. and it seems like something that could be covered in the basic education, and I don't really hear a serious discussion about whether to factor that in. It's a lot of around like evolution versus creationism, which should not be taking time. I don't know what kind of approach, what approaches there are in career paths for that kind of thing.
You know, it's not, to be honest, there are two reasons why it's not talked about. It is not part of the Common Core standard kind of approach, and that's where schools have to put their resources. It's not part of what colleges are looking for, because that's what independent schools are looking at. You will find that it's done on the margins. We have one day a week called Lab Day for our high school kids, and there's a lab course that meets once a week that actually the kids help design in economics. We call them the baby bankers. So it's very much about financial literacy, but it's about 10 kids. So that's not something you can make a career on. But it's taught by one of our math teachers who is a career changer, has an MBA, and is teaching stats and Algebra 2 and this economics and finance course. And they go down to the stock exchange and they have a lot of fun. So he's teaching that course as well as teaching the core courses.
There are many organizations that are dedicated to sort of improving financial literacy or nutrition or any sort of angle that betters kids' lives or sexual health. So I think often that's through a nonprofit that does work with schools. We have a program in our school called Wall Street Wizards, so it's a similar idea, and that's us marshaling the resources of New York City, where bankers with big hearts sort of volunteer their time to do financial literacy work with our students. But it's not really part of our day. I do think one aspect of our teaching job is to teach kids those skills that they will need to be successful in life that are not just academic. And so much of what we do is try to instill these habits of perseverance, of people talk a lot about close reading right now, and I think you need to read closely so you don't get hoodwinked, or so that you can distill the meaning of an argument and present it to your boss, or whatever field you're going to go into, you need those skills. So there is so much, I'm an English teacher and it's a lot about reading, writing, and communicating, but it's so much about how do you look people in the eye, how do you speak loudly so people can hear you, these larger skills that are important too.
Well, let me pose a question to panelists that you're sort of referring to, which is you just read about all this testing, right? And not all schools, but there has been some movement of testing along the way, and then measuring against testing and so forth. Any opinions of these panelists about, really in two dimensions? One is that the right thing? But the other is, what effect has that had on what it's like to be a teacher, right? In other words, is it made it better, worse, or whatever? So, I'll let any one of you, because this is in the papers all the time, right? This issue.
Yeah, the advice is become a psychometrician, right? There's a budding industry, but psychometricians are the people who norm all of the standardized tests, so they make sure that they're statistically reliable. And I just like the word personally, but I also think that there's a lot of use for that in the field. It is another thing that I don't think is necessarily overly dramatized. I think that standardized testing has become a very a real focus in the public schools. New York is especially high on standardized tests because it's not just state test exams. It's the regents in high school. It's the specialized high school admissions test to get into some of the top schools like Stuyvesant. It is the fact that our in the city test scores are used for a whole variety of purposes that feel very high stakes, from teacher retention and evaluation decisions to whether schools stay open or are closed. There's an annual school report card in the public schools, and a really huge number, and I we'll say 85% because I don't want to overstate it, but it actually might be higher, of a school's grade is determined on, you know, how students did on the previous year's test scores. Whether you get into a top tier high school or not is often determined by your 7th grade test score. So there is not only a lot of testing happening, but there is a lot of emphasis on the results of those tests, which really do create that sort of high stakes atmosphere.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And you know, you certainly hear both sides. I mean, there are people who say, well, if you have a way of measuring, if you don't measure, you don't have a way of uniformly telling, you know, are they learning the right things, so forth. There are others who are saying, well, now the teachers are teaching to the test, right, and so forth. So it's skewing what they're teaching. So I hear both arguments. What's your feeling?
Well, I think George is going to do a really good job of no, but on the pedagogical approach to how students learn, I think I'm not a huge test person, but I do think that there are some numbers that have come out of sort of our focus on test scores that are really powerful, like the fact that in the South Bronx, 8% of students are college ready. 8%, and that's sort of an unacceptable statistic, and I think it is a call to action, and if we use it as such, I think that there is a lot of power in that, but I think that we can't get distracted because testing.
Well, basically, there is some good data, and I have, in an independent school, we do a certain amount of testing to try to figure out how effective we are. But high stakes testing has a negative impact on student outcomes. Now, so the beauty of it for us in independent schools is we're not obligated. You know, we won that court case.
Which I think is really telling,
Right.
that any parent that can pay to send their kid to school is essentially allowing that child to opt out of a huge battery of tests.
Right, and therefore, you know, one of the greatest years in school is 4th grade, and it's now lost in the state of New York. So it does drive families to us for 4th grade, and so we need to get a better balance. I think that we need to find ways to make those kids in the South Bronx more college ready without interfering with their education. And right now, we have gotten to a place where instead of empowering teachers to be original, creative, nurturer, empathetic people, we're taking teachers and we're turning them into test prep people because their careers and their school's careers depend on that. And therefore, you remember the kind of person that I just talked about who doesn't make it in education, who sets the goals for their kids based on external standards rather than the ones that are there for the kids? That's what we're turning the teachers into because testing has become so ubiquitous. And the governmental entities are to blame for it, the foundations are to blame for it. And happily for us, we get to avoid it. But we have a different set of metrics, which is if our parents and kids don't feel successful, they can walk away and go down the street and get for free what we're charging a fortune for. So and it should be noted that independent schools, especially the one you went to, and universities like Yale, which are private universities, do an excellent job of bringing people in who can't afford it. So there, it's more about people who can gain access to the information, have access to these schools that then allow them to opt out of the test.
And I should also note, so, I think I've said several times that the work that we do at my school is political, and this is one area that is especially close to our hearts. There is a group of schools in the state of New York, of public schools, of publicly funded schools that are not charter schools, that are exempt from the high-stakes Regents exams that all New York City high school students take. My students take the English Regents exams. It's the New York Performance Standards Consortium, and we have our own metrics, and it's not parents' feet. It's teacher designed. It is continually reviewed by a group of teachers, by independent psychometricians, by the researchers who see how our kids do in college. It's portfolio-based assessments, where at the end of every semester, students need to present and defend their learning to outside evaluators. It allows us to create curriculum that focuses on depth instead of the breadth of coverage, that really allows us to work with students to hone those reading and writing skills and research skills that they'll need to succeed in college. And our kids do well in college, and that is a huge metric, and our kids graduate high school at higher numbers than kids in other public schools. So there is this real movement out there that is combating this pressure and providing alternative models that allows teachers and principals and parents and students more control and more say over holding each other accountable.
Now, I have,
Can I just add one more thing, and I'm
Sure.
sorry, but on the high stakes tests, which is, the New York State exams are what we call a summative assessment, so they just tell you how you did at the end of the year. But schools and teachers and families get no information that will help students become better as a result of those tests. So they don't keep a copy of the questions. They never get they don't have any, they don't know what students got on each question and what answer, they chose for the wrong answer. So they don't get the data to be able to use that to do anything to improve student learning. And so it is just high stakes, you are good, you are bad, end of story. And so there is room for assessment in education, certainly, as a tool for growth, but the way it is being done currently, it leaves a lot to be desired.
so I have a few questions via email, but let me ask, Robin, are there any additional questions there? And we will take one or two questions and we'll end.
We're all set here.
Okay, so there's one last, we're going to end with one last question, and this is from a fellow Joey. Said, you mentioned that education is looking for more, the education profession is looking more for educators who have professional degrees in specific fields such as math and science. Another mentioned that professionals coming into education without any classroom experience is challenging at best. Would you recommend someone with a master's or PhD in math, science degree acquire classroom experience and decide if education is right for them?
I would say that the answer to that is yes. And we have people who have TA'd, but TAing is a little different from actual teaching, where if you have summers where you could work with high school students or middle school students in a summer program, and there are tons and tons of summer educational enrichment programs out there, those experiences will give you a depth of experience, because if you're going to work in an independent school, you're going to do a demo lesson. And that's going to be the most important part of your interview process. And if you've never taught before, you're not going to do well in that demo lesson.
There's an organization called Math for America that's a nonprofit that has a variety of different tracks. They especially have a path into teaching for professionals or people with graduate degrees in math and science to get into teaching. It's mathforamerica.org, I believe. You can just Google it. They are a great resource for someone who has a strong background in the STEM fields and are interested in getting into education.
I was going to say, in our science department in our school, they were discussing how teachers that come in with those advanced degrees for math and science, it takes them about 3 years to get acclimated to teaching and becoming successful with mentoring from other faculty members and from the department head. Also, any tutoring young people, as you said, working in summer programs, any contact with young people where you're, especially in math and science, where you're able to relate. Sometimes the teacher is very, very smart. They can't relate the material to the student in those advanced classes. That's a big deal in high school. Yeah.
Well, we are running over a little bit. We started a little bit late, but I want to first thank our panelists, and I think
I want to thank the 2 Yale students who really managed
Good job, and I thought there. Send your resumes to to George. But I want to thank the panel. This was really wonderful. I think we covered different areas that has a lot of different facets, but I think we drilled into some things that I think will be very helpful. And I want to thank all of you for being patient with our technology snafu at the beginning, and I hope it didn't deter you, but I am now going to allow everyone to go to dinner, right? So thank you very much.
Thank you.